Now that we have our functionality to view bills and add bills, we can start creating the menus to actually expose this functionality to the user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new module. So I'll put it down here after the get input function. I'm going to call my module menu. Now I'm creating a module because we know we're going to be having multiple menus, and it just makes sense to put all the menus into a single module. That way they're all grouped together and easily accessible. The first menu I'm going to create is the add bill menu. So we'll create a new public function. It needs to be public, that way we can access it outside the menu module. It's going to be named add bill, and it's going to accept a mutable reference to a bills structure, and this is required, that way we can add new bills through the structure. We're going to print out a message, that way the user knows what to enter. So the first thing they're going to enter is the bill name. To get that name, we'll use the get input function that we created earlier. And we'll need to match on it since it returns an option. So we'll do get input, and if there's some input, we'll just return it. And that will get populated into the name. And if we don't get any input, we'll just fail out of the function. So right here, we're matching on the get input, which has an option. If we get some input, we'll take the input, put it into name. Otherwise, we're just going to return out of the function with nothing. The next thing we'll need to do is get the amount. So we'll say, we'll get some variable named amount, and we'll match on get input. And if we get an amount, we'll do the same thing. If we don't get an amount, then we'll just return. Next, we'll create the bill. And we'll set the name and amount fields within the bill. Since the name variable and amount variable are the same names of the fields within the bill structure up here, so the structure has name and amount as the fields. If that's the case, if the name of the fields match the name of the variables, then you don't need to assign the field name and the variable name. So we don't need to have name like this, and we don't need amount like that. It'll just automatically assume that it's for the field name in the structure. The next thing we'll need to do is add this bill into the bills structure that we passed into the function. So we'll do bills.add, and we'll just add the new bill. And then we'll do a print line for the user. We'll say bill was added. Now we have a little bit of a problem here. So if we take a look at the get input function, we'll see that it returns a string. However, if we go up to our bill structure, the amount is actually a float. So we'll need to convert that string into a float before we can use it in our structure. If we did a cargo check, we'll see that there's a compiler error because we tried to add a string as a float. So let's take a look at it real fast. Well, before we get that far, we do need to import our structure and our function into this module. So when you have a module, it doesn't have access to things outside. So we'll need to use things from the crate. So we'll use the bills structure. We'll probably need the individual bill later too, so we'll use that. And we'll use the get input function. Now we should have access, and we should get a different error. And there we go. So we have an amount. It's supposed to be an F64, but instead we have a string. So we're going to make an individual function just to convert a string into a float for getting the bill information. I'm going to put this function near the get input function. I'll name this function get bill amounts. And that's going to return an option, but instead of a string like the get input, it's going to return an F64. That way we can use it within our bill. And this is going to be an infinite menu, just like the other ones. So we'll have an amount, and we'll create an infinite loop here. Within this loop, we'll just get a string input using our existing get input function. So this will get the user input. And if we get some, we'll just use it. Otherwise, we're just going to return none. Now, if our input is nothing, then we'll also return none. The next thing we'll need to do is parse the string into an F64. So we'll just call this parsed input. And this is going to be a result. It's going to be an F64, and we don't know the error type, so we'll let Rust figure it out. So we'll do input.parse. The .parse function, that's going to try to turn it into an appropriate data type. So in this case, it's going to try to turn it into an F64. So you can change that to an I32 or any other numeric type you want, and parse will try to turn it into that type. We're going to match on the parsed input. And if it's okay, we'll have an amount, and we'll just return the amount. And if we get an error, we're going to ignore what the error actually indicates. We're not really concerned with the actual error message, because we're going to just display our own message, and the user's going to have to try again. So we'll display, please enter a number. Okay, before we leave this function, let's just walk through it really quick. Okay, we have our getBillAmount function. It returns an optional 64-bit floating point number. We first print out the amount information. That way the user knows what they should be entering. We then enter into an infinite loop. We first get the user input as a string using our existing getInput function. If we get some input, it's just going to get placed straight into there. Otherwise, we're going to return none. If the input happens to just be blank, we'll also return none. So if the user just hits enter, we're going to assume that they just want to leave the program and it's going to return none, and that'll just get returned like that. With the parsed input, we can do the .parse function to try to turn it into an F64. So these type annotation here, that determines what type the parse function will attempt to turn the string into. And since we have a result, it's going to be an OK or it's going to be an error. So if it's OK, we get an amount, and we'll just return that amount in the option. Otherwise, we're going to do a print line and prompt the user to enter a number. If that's the case, where they enter it incorrectly, since we're in an infinite loop here, if we get an error, it's just going to return back to the very beginning, and they'll have to enter an amount again. Now we can go back to our menu module and utilize this getBillAmount function. So we'll need to import it. So we'll use getBillAmount. And now we can replace this getInput with getBillAmount. And so now the amount here, this is going to be an F64 instead of a string. So now we'll do a cargo check to make sure we've done everything correctly. And we don't have any errors, so we're looking good. We still have plenty of warnings, but that's mostly because we're not utilizing all the functions yet. Next, we're going to create the menu for viewing the bills. So we'll add that down here. We'll make it public as well. So we'll just call it view bills. And it'll take a reference to our bills structure. We don't need to return anything since it's just going to print out information. So we'll just do a simple for loop. So for bill in bills.getAll. Remember that the getAll function returns a vector to references of bills. So let's take another look at it really quick. So we have getAll, and as we see, it returns a vector and it references bill, which has all the information that we want to show the bills. So for each bill that we have, we're just going to print out some information. And I'm just going to use the debug token for this. And the debug token is just going to print out all of the information in the bill. So it's just going to print out bill and then name, and it'll print the name, then amount, and it'll print the amount. So it won't look super pretty, but it'll get the point across. The last thing we need to do is actually utilize these menus within our main menu loop. So let's jump down to the bottom. Here's our main menu loop. Now we have our comment here from before where we need to create the bills structure. So we'll just do that now. So we'll make some new bills. We'll use our new function that we created. And within our main menu loop, we can now use our menu functions that we created earlier, because right now they just return nothing. So if we use our menu module and we have our add bill menu, and it requires a mutable reference to the bills structure. So we have our mutable bills here. And the add bill function is going to take a mutable borrow of the bills. And let's take a look at the signature just for a recap. And so we see our add bill function. It does require bills, and they need to be a mutable borrow. That way they can be modified. We can then also add our view bill menu by going into the menu module and then calling the view bill function. I believe we use an S. And it just needs a regular borrow of the bills because it's not making any modifications. So we can just borrow the bills. When we use the menu module in this way, accessing the menu module, and we're using the path selection operator to access the add bill function within the menu module. So if we take a look at the add bill function, we have our menu module and we're accessing the function within. So now that that's done, let's hop back into our terminal and do a cargo check to make sure that we got everything in correctly. And we don't have any errors, and all of our warnings went away because now we're utilizing all the functionality in our program. Now that we have some basic functionality implemented, I'm going to try running the program and see if it works as we hope it does. So we have our bill manager menu, so we can add bills and view bills. So if I hit enter, the program still aborts because we still have that expect function. So we're going to try adding a bill name, test, amount, 5. And if we view the bills, then we have our bills right here. So we have our bill, it's named test, and the amount is 5. Let's try adding a bill with invalid price information. So amount, we'll just put in 5 and we'll type out the word 5. And it prompts us to please enter a number. And it's going to keep going because we have an infinite loop. And if we just hit enter with nothing, it goes back. And we see since it went back, it didn't add any bill. And one more quick test. We'll type in test2 for the bill name. We'll add a bad amount, and then we'll add a correct amount to make sure it does still get added properly. So we view the bills, and now we have 2 bills. We have test and test2 with 5 and 1, because 1 is the amount that we added, and the second bill is named test2. Now that we've gotten that functionality implemented, we've completed stage 1. Let's double check to make sure. So stage 1, they want to be able to add bills, including the name and amount owed, which we can do, and we can view existing bills. So stage 1 is complete. In the next video, we'll be implementing functionality to remove bills so we can do stage 2.